So welcome to Spring Wild Greens. My name is Amy Loving, and I am the Director of Education here at Nahant Marsh, and I'm super happy to be here with everyone today. And I'm glad that we're doing this over lunch because you'll be able to not get too hungry, hopefully, and have some inspiration maybe for some things that you can be looking out in your backyard, things that you can find to forage. So again, if you have any questions, please post them down in the chat, and I will do my best to check that throughout the presentation, but I will also leave time at the end of the presentation for questions as well. So if I miss it during the presentation, we'll check it out afterwards. Other things is that this presentation is being recorded, so I'll share that with all participants in case you need to step out at any time. And I also have some notes that I will be sharing with you as well that have some useful links in them in case you're wanting to learn more. So my approach to this, let me stop my video here real quick. So my approach to looking at spring wild greens is to really look at things that are maybe considered more of weeds, because when we look at our yards and we are in a natural area, there's a lot of things around us that are very, very useful. So my approach to this presentation was to kind of give us a different perspective as to what is growing around us and what are some things that we may have thought were weeds, but were actually pretty healthy for us. So why go wild for weeds? So this is a picture of me and my grandma at her 80th birthday. And this was a few years back. And she really helped me to connect to loving wild foods and nature. She certainly wasn't the only one in my family, but she was a big contributor. And I remember, her putting daylily leaves in my salad when I was a kid. And I thought, Grandma, I can't eat a flower. And she said, just try it. You'll like it. And so, of course, I did. And I did. And so that was one of my earliest memories of eating something that to me wasn't traditional food. And so for me, it's about kind of that connection to nature. The more that I learned about wild edibles and foraging, the more I had an appreciation for the Native American people who lived here before us, and really just kind of that deep-rooted connection that you get when you can go out and forage things on your own, and you know where these things came from. So it teaches them self-sufficiency. You get to learn about some of the nutritional and medicinal benefits of these plants. And it also helps to teach you how to identify plants. So if you don't know how to identify plants, you don't know basics of botany, that can be real troublesome if you're going out and wanting to forage. Certain things are going to be easy to identify. Everybody knows what a dandelion looks like, but certain plants, if you really get into foraging, you're going to want to make sure that your botany skills are up to par. Wild foraging also teaches you to eat seasonally. So there's a lot of different plants that are going to be available at different times of the season. So this season is really the season for greens and flowers, early flowers. As we get later into summer, that's going to change, and those things are going to be more of our fruits and nuts and berries. And as we get into winter, you're going to get into maybe some more of your tubers, and that'll be early spring as well. So things are going to change seasonally. And it teaches you to kind of have an appreciation for these things. And to me, it's fun and it's free. So safety and locations. Safety first. I kind of mentioned that in my previous slide, but you want to make sure that you have 100% positive identification for the plant that you are going to try to be consuming. You also want to make sure that you are foraging according to the season. You would not want to go out and forage nettles, for example, which I'll talk about in a moment, later on in the summer. That is not the peak of their season. So having that information is super important as well. And then location. So you want to make sure that you are aware of any areas that may have been sprayed Roadsides are areas that you would probably want to avoid. If you want to forage in your local park, just make sure that you are familiar with the park rules. And if you've got a friend who's got some private property, or know it's private property, be sure to ask the landowner before foraging on their land. And then check your backyard. Honestly, I find a lot of these things are going to be in our yards, especially if you have a yard that you don't treat. And if your yard doesn't look like a golf course, you're probably going to find some things that are popping up that could be useful for you. So the first plant that we're going to get into, and I think I have around 10 maybe that I'm going to highlight, and then we'll talk about some other ones, but we'll have several here that we're going to kind of dive a little bit deeper into, and then there'll be ones that I'll mention at the end too, and where to find some additional resources. So this first one is nettles, and right now is the time to start harvesting your nettles. Now there's two different types of nettles: the stinging nettles on the left screen here, and then our wood nettle. Both are popping up right now. The wood nettle tends to be found more in like wet soils, along river and stream banks, bottomlands. And so that's where you're going to find the wood nettle. The stinging nettle is going to be more in an open area and not as close to rivers and streams. It's going to be more of an open field area. If you notice that the wood nettle, both of them are edible though, okay? The wood nettle leaves are different. They are much whiter, and the teeth margins, the serrated margins, are not quite as pronounced as in the stinging nettle. Both taste very good. You do have to cook nettles prior to consuming them. Now, my uncle is an avid forager and hunter and outdoorsman, and he has built up a tolerance to eating very young, so the very tippy tops of the nettles. He can eat those without having any adverse effects. I do not recommend going out and trying that, however, but there are some people that can tolerate that. And if you crush up the nettles, like if they're raw and you crush them up, sometimes that can alleviate those stinging hairs. And it's the stinging hairs on the nettle that if that touches your flesh, it's going to cause a stinging sensation because it's putting a chemical into your body that's causing that stinging irritation. So when you're picking nettles, I recommend that you wear gloves. Sometimes cloth gloves aren't always the best. You want to make sure that you've got some really sturdy gloves that have maybe some rubber on them, or you can use like a leather glove or something as well. Those are just going to help to give your hand a little bit more protection, especially if you tend to have sensitive skin. But what you want to do is go out and pluck the top growth of it. I would say the first, maybe 3 inches or so. Once you start getting towards the base of the plant, those leaves are going to be older. They're going to be bitter, not as tender. So I recommend just picking kind of the top few inches there. And I always, when I go out and forage nettles, my method is to bring a plastic grocery bag with me. And once I fill up the plastic grocery bag, I know that I've got what I need, and that's gonna be plenty. So what can you do with the nettles? So here's a few pictures of things that you can do. So you could top them on pizza, you could make a nettle pesto, you could put them into a soup. So really there's a lot of variety that you can a lot of variety of foods that you can make, lots of recipes with the nettles. I would recommend that you blanch your nettles and then freeze them so that you've got them throughout the year as a green that you can use. And yes, you do eat the leaves, although some of the if you're making sure that you're getting the tender tops of the plant. Usually the stem is soft enough, it's not fibrous, and you can go ahead and just chop that up and add it in. I like to take my nettles back to the kitchen, fill up my sink, throw the nettles in there, swish them around, let them get any bugs off of them, and then do another quick rinse in a strainer. And then from there, I just add that into a pot, and whatever water's already left on the nettles from your rinsing, you may only need to add a little bit more, and then just bring that to warm up. The leaves will start to darken in color and hopefully absorb the rest of that liquid. If you've got any liquid left, you can use that as a nettle tea. Nettle tea does have a lot of medicinal uses. It reduces inflammation, is known to relieve PMS and other menstrual or menopausal issues. And the seed and root is even noted to be used to protect and nourish the prostate gland. So there's other parts of the plant that are useful as well. Any questions about the preparation of the nettles? I'll give it just a minute. Okay, great. And if you do think of anything, just throw it in the chat. And like I said, if I don't see it right away, I will get to it at the end here. So this is one of my favorite greens. Oh, the other thing I should mention too is that if you want to use this as a medicinal tea, just go out and pick it and hang it to dry like you would any other medicinal herb. And then you would be able to use it as a medicinal tea as well. Garlic mustard. So this one's coming up right now. Garlic mustard is considered an invasive species. And so pick as much of it as you want. And that's really, I mentioned this before, but all of the plants that I'm focusing on in this presentation, really we don't have to worry about over harvesting them because they're already considered to be either a noxious weed or an invasive weed or invasive species. So when we do talk about foraging for wild edibles, there's many plants that we want to be very careful how much we forage, but these particular ones you should be safe foraging what you need. Excuse me. So garlic mustard grows in these little rosettes. They do tend to have that red stem and then kind of a heart-shaped leaf there that has the kind of wavy edges, wavy serrated edges. Right now, the plant looks like this one on the left, okay? And this is when you would want to harvest it. You can dig up the entire plant, and I would recommend doing so because this is an invasive species. Removing the entire plant would help to reduce the spread in that particular area. The root of this plant is useful just as the leaves are. So the leaves you would harvest as a culinary herb, and that's how it came here and invaded our woods in the first place. Is it was brought over by Europeans during settlement as a medicinal, or not medicinal, but as a culinary herb. And it was planted and it started to invade the forests out east and has made its way across the US. So that's how it ended up here, but we can still utilize this plant and find some of its virtue. So if you dig up the entire plant, the root can actually be used to make a horseradish. And I do have a link for that recipe. That links up for lots of recipes that I'll be sharing with you. And the leaves, they have that pungent garlic mustard smell to them. So one great way to identify plants is not just by looking at them, but also by smelling them too. So if you see something that looks like this out in the woods, there are a few lookalikes. What you can do is just take a leaf, crush it in your hands, just kind of rub the leaf between your fingers and smell it. Because rubbing that and crushing it will release the oils in it, and you'll be able to smell that pungent, garlicky, mustardy smell. And then you know you've got it there. So let's see, we do have a question. Let me answer this real quick as I see. If you are using nettles for soup, do you need to cook it first as well? No, you don't. you just want to make sure that you cut it up to the size that you need it for your soup, and stick it in there. I will provide recipes at the end. I make pesto with garlic mustard. Use a pesto recipe and replace basil with garlic mustard. Yes, I've done that too. I sometimes think that the pesto is a little too strong, so I like to cut it with other herbs, but it all depends on the plant. Some plants are, may have a different flavor than others, so it's good to kind of test that beforehand. And you definitely want to make sure that you are harvesting the plant before it blooms. Just like with any green that you have growing in your garden, once that green or that lettuce starts to flower out, it's done for. It will no longer be flavorful. It will be bitter, and it can tend to be fibrous. So I would say once it gets to the point where it's on the left or on the right here, where you can see the white blooms, I would no longer forage that area. But you can still pick it, dig it up by the root, and put it in a bag and take it out of that forest. Do your own invasive species removal while you're out there. All right, and there is some garlic mustard pesto. Dan mentioned that here. So you do just take a traditional pesto recipe, and you can replace it with the garlic mustard, and with a little bit of basil if you want to jazz it up a little bit. You can also make it even more wild, and if you've got any hazelnuts that you've harvested from the previous year, you could also add that in there as well, and it would be a very wild pesto then. Oh, excuse me. Okay. Dandelion. We all know how to identify dandelions, so I won't get into that, but they're highly nutritious. My grandmother swears by them. She picks dandelions throughout the summer. Some folks don't like the taste of them as summer is creeping upon us, because they can get bitter like other greens. Once they flower, they also don't taste quite as fresh. So try to see if you can get them when they're starting to have that rosette in the early spring before the flower pops up. But the greens are rich in vitamin K, A, and C. And some of the minerals that are in there, super healthy for you. You got calcium, iron, potassium, magnesium. They even have omega-3 fatty acids and omega-6 fatty acids. And the flowers are also very nutritional as well. They contain vitamin A and vitamin B12. So some medicinal uses for dandelions are the greens have been used as a mild diuretic for bladder and kidney problems, and flowers can even act as an anti-inflammatory. The root is used as a liver tonic. So the next time you go to Hy-Vee or your local health store, look in the health food section at the teas, and you will find dandelion root. So of course you want to collect in early spring. Make sure that you wash the leaves thoroughly, and you can eat them raw in salads, especially if you get them early, or you can steam or saute them with other greens, olive oil, lemon, little apple cider vinegar if you want, garlic. Kind of jazz it up with whatever spices make sense to you. And when preparing the flowers, so once the flower has bloomed and you're no longer collecting the greens, you want to make sure that you are collecting the flowers midday. And that is going to just make sure that your blooms are full. And then you're going to want to separate the petals from the bitter green part. And then you can take those petals and you can add them to baked goods like pancakes, muffins, cakes, cookies. You can even take the flower head and batter it and fry it up like a mini donut. So they're one of my mentors in the foraging world, Mike Kriebel. He has written a couple of different books on foraging, and he loves to make dandelion donuts with students, among other things too. So you can also make dandelion wine. This is not something that I personally have experience with, but I know people that have. And then the blossoms can also be used to make a sweet, refreshing jelly. So lots and lots of uses for the dandelion. Here is a photo of a salad, just an example of that, and then some shortbread cookies. So lots of different things you can do. There's a ton of recipes out on the internet, and I will share with you at least the ones that I'm mentioning here in this presentation. Chickweed is another one that's coming up right now. This one is found in yards that do not get sprayed. I have a property down by the river that is abundant in chickweed right now. And if you look at the Latin name, Stellara media, so that really bodes to the look of the flower. If we look at the flower up close, it really does look like a star. So this one is going to have opposite branching leaves, that small, delicate little flower that looks like a star, and going to be very, very common. It's got a pretty sweet, light, fresh flavor to it. And again, growing in abundance. So you can eat all parts of this plant. I'm not sure about the root, but anything above ground should be safe to eat. It does contain vitamin C, has calcium, potassium, phosphorus, iron, zinc, and the aerial part can be used medicinally. It has cooling properties in it, so any plant that has what's called a cooling property is really good for treating hot or irritated rashes or skin irritations. So it would do great as a poultice or a salve, and you can apply that to the salve to your skin and soothe some of any skin irritation you may have. And it's even gentle enough to be used on infants. So nice, gentle, medicinal plant. So this one you can eat raw. You could add it into wraps or smoothies. It really doesn't store well. So for long-term use, it's best to freeze it like you would any other herb, or make it into a tincture, or make it into the salve, because the salve should last for a while. You can also, just for a quick medicine, you're on the trail and let's say you do run into stinging nettles while you're foraging for spring, and your leg rubs against it and there's some chickweed nearby, you can just take the chickweed and kind of crush it up, rub it on the area that's irritating, or chew it and make it into a pulp somehow and apply it directly to that area and then cover it. And then you can kind of repeat that as needed. So some really good recipes that I have found is the picture above here is, they're calling it a chickweed grilled cheese. So just adding some fresh chickweed to a grilled cheese. Looks like maybe some goat cheese is on there. You can add it into your pesto. Lots of things that we're talking about today can be used in a pesto, or you can also use them to make that salve. So I do have that recipe that I'll share with everybody. Violets. So violets are popping up right now, and they're very beautiful, easy to identify. You can eat the greens and the flowers. They can be made into jellies and jams. They can be used in a salad to brighten up your salad. You can candy the flowers and add them onto cakes or other baked goods. So lots of different uses for the violet. And when we talk about nutrition, it's high in vitamin C and contains vitamin A. And medicinally, it has cooling properties. And so this can actually aid in inflammation and sore throats. And herbalists have recommended it to support any, I shouldn't say support, rather, can reduce possibly cysts. So there are some other non-traditional sort of uses for this plant. But you want to make sure, of course, that you wash and dry and add the wash and dry your leaves and your flowers prior to use, just like you would any other grain. And because many of these things may be coming out of your yard, that's something you want to consider too. If you have a dog like I do, you may not want to forage in your backyard. You may choose to forage in a different area, like your front yard. Your neighbors may think you're a little kooky out there picking your dandelions and violets, but bring them a jar of violet jelly and they won't think you're so kooky anymore. I just think they look really pretty too. And pretty food is always good food. So wild bergamot, this one is just starting to come up right now. It's not flowering, but you can still harvest it as a medicinal herb or culinary herb. So medicinally, this has been noted to be used by Native Americans for colds, coughs, and especially stomach aches, gassy stomach aches. And it's gentle enough that it was used on infants. So this is another good one to have. I would not consider this a weedy plant by the traditional definition of some of the, like the other ones that we looked at, but it can tend to spread because it is a member of the mint family. So it's got square stem, opposite leaves, and it's going to start to bloom in summertime. June, July is when we're going to see this bloom. And but prior to blooming, you can harvest those early growth leaves, and that's probably the best time to harvest if you're wanting just the leaves. This has like an oregano type scent and flavor to it. So that's what you could substitute it in your recipes, is anything that you would use oregano in, which is used in a ton of different recipes. One thing I like to do with it is during summer camp, we have some edible classes that we do, and the kids will go out and we'll pick the wild bergamot and pick off the petals and then cut up the leaves and add them into a biscuit mix, and we'll make wild bergamot biscuits, and we'll cook them in the solar oven. So that's a really fun, super easy thing that you could do and share with your kids, your grandkids, your nieces, nephews, whomever. I would also recommend too that if you're wanting to harvest this in the springtime, to dry it as an herb, whether you're using it medicinally or culinary in your culinary recipes, the longer you wait to harvest it, the more that this plant can get this kind of like powdery mildew on the leaves. And at that point, you wouldn't want to harvest it. So just kind of be mindful that as the plant gets a little bit older, it may start to develop those powdery leaves, and then you would want to make sure that you're avoiding harvesting. So early harvesting can kind of help to alleviate that problem. So here are some pictures of some other options of things that you can make here. Shortbreads, you can see it's dried. You can dry the flowers and the leaves. And then this is a kind of an Italian green sauce that you could also make with this. And that recipe will also be included into the document I'll hand out. I'm going to pause here since we're about halfway through and see if there's any questions I've missed. Okay, got a question about the nutritional value of garlic mustard. Is it the same as garlic? Not quite. Really, the biggest things is it's like many other greens. It's going to be high in vitamin A and C, and there are some trace minerals. That would be in the green part. In the root, I'm not sure how different that would be. I would imagine not as much as garlic, not as much as traditional garlic. So a good way to get the small bugs out of the dandy flowers is to soak them. Sometimes if you soak them, it can kind of degrade the integrity of the bloom. So you could just try to shake it out a little bit. Another option would be to lay your blossoms on a paper towel or somewhere that you don't mind bugs crawling off of it, and just kind of give the bugs a minute to disperse would be one way you could try to alleviate that. And for the chickweed, any aerial part of the plant is going to be where you would want to harvest that. Any good books to keep developing these skills? Yes, there are a ton of good books out there and a ton of online resources, social media. So I'm going to go over all the books that I have used and give you the information on the handout as well. Okay, we will keep going. So, and actually during the Boston Tea Party, I want to put this image in there. The tea that they were overthrowing was wild bergamot tea, believe it or not. It was known as Oswego tea because that tribe, which was in modern upstate New York area, drank the tea. And the European settlers actually took up to drinking that tea after they dumped the tea during the Boston Tea Party. So has an interesting history there. Red clover, and I think this might be one of my last ones here. So red clover is used medicinally, but also can be used as kind of a traditional garnish if you want to. There are some reports that say that it can help in the prevention of less healthy forms of estrogen and keep them from accumulating. Other studies have suggested that the excess of estrogen could be a cause of cancer and some menopausal disorders. So there are some traditional herbalists who will recommend using the blossoms as a tea to help to alleviate some of those unhealthy formation of the estrogen. It contains protein, vitamin or B vitamins, vitamin C, and iron. And this is in the blossom. Anybody who's ever been a youngster around red clover has probably plucked up the blossoms and sucked on the ends of them. It tastes like honey. So it's a good garnish for salads and maybe some fresh garden type soups added to some baked goods. Looks like it's on some sort of fritter here. So lots of options for that. And you want to make sure that you use the blossoms when they are in their peak. So you want them when they're bright pink. If they start to look dry, that would be, you wouldn't want to forage them at that time. If you're wanting to take them for tea, get them when they're that bright pink, and then you can dry them and use them to make tea later. And you can also use the blooms to make a jam or jelly rather, if you want to do that too. So it's a nice sweet jelly, and you would follow any traditional jelly recipe, whether you're working with violets or red clovers. There's some basic recipes that would be out there for you to find. So some things that we're not going to dive too deep into, but I want to talk about them as well. Some things that are kind of maybe would be a good tasty garnish along with our red clover. So red buds, the flowers are blooming right now. They kind of have a sweet pea flavor. So and they are a legume, so that makes sense, but you can go out and harvest those right now and add them into your dishes. In the first slide or the title page, I had a photo of a salad that had all kinds of wild greens that were harvested. It was topped with wood sorrel, which is the clover-like plant on the right here. It had violet greens, violet blossoms. It had red buds. So there's a ton of things right now that you could go out and harvest and make a really beautiful salad with. Be bright and cheery and fresh. But wait, there's more. So a few more things that I'll mention. And there are more things than this that you can forage right now in springtime. Some of them you just want to make sure that you don't harvest too many of them. And when you're eating something new, you're adding something new into your diet, make sure you don't overdo it. You never know how your body is going to react to that food. So one thing are wild leeks are very popular right now. In some parts of the country, they call them ramps. So there are many areas where wild leeks have been over harvested. So this is one that if you did find a very large patch, you would only want to take a small amount, and you wouldn't want to take that small amount from one big cluster. So these are going to grow in clusters. And what I would recommend is that you take a little bit from each cluster or kind of spread out your harvest so that you're not damaging the leek crop, because this is kind of a slow growing plant and it takes time to establish. So you want to make sure that you're only taking a small amount so that cluster in that patch can continue to grow at a reasonable pace and not be damaged by over harvesting. Another one is nodding onion. So this one, the bulb tastes kind of like a garlic onion flavor. It's, I've used it to put in and make like a herbal garlicky cream cheese spread. The one thing I will say about this is that in high quantities, it can be a little toxic. It can maybe cause an upset stomach. So just be careful about the quantity of this one if you're trying to harvest that. Hosta shoots. So these are coming up right now, and you want to get them when they're still wrapped up like they're shown in this picture here, but you can saute them. Not sure if you can eat them raw. I've only seen folks eat them sauteed, and this is not one that I have tried yet myself, but I know that my uncle raves about them and enjoys them. And again, if you are wanting to make sure that you're not over harvesting your hostas around your home, just take a few and try them out and see what you think. Another native plant here is the Virginia waterleaf. This one is a ground cover in the forest, and this one tastes kind of like spinach. It's recommended that you actually don't rinse this one off, and it has something to do with the flavor. It can degrade the flavor. So you want to make sure that when you're harvesting the Virginia waterleaf, that you are just making sure that the leaves look clean. This one can also be harvested throughout the growing season and is one of the few wild greens that can be harvested later in the year. Trout lily. So the leaf and the bulb is harvestable in this particular plant. It's also found in the woodland. If we look at the side here of the previous picture of the Virginia waterleaf, that's a trout lily leaf right there that has yet to bloom. So this is another one. I wouldn't recommend harvesting a lot of these, but if you want to try to have what we call a trail snack and just test it out, this is something that you could go out and just test with it. I wouldn't recommend going out and harvesting a ton of these. And it's also pretty small, so you're not going to get a real bulky thing. Dock green. So curly dock is an edible leaf, and it does have a kind of slightly acidic flavor to it, kind of a lemony flavor. The leaves are rather soft and smooth. I first learned about this one from my uncle, and he told me he likes to harvest his dock early in the year, and he likes to put it on a turkey sandwich. He says it tastes really good on turkey sandwiches, and I have tried it, and it does taste very good on turkey sandwiches. So I'm sure it would taste good on other ones as well. But another one that you could harvest and use raw. I don't have any experience with cooking the dock greens, but you probably could be able to do that too. And another interesting one that I'm excited to try out this year is roasting maple seeds. So just like you would roast any other nut or seed, you can roast maple seeds too. So that might be something that you would want to try. And there are a ton of seeds out there, so you do not have to worry about over harvesting that one. Could be kind of a fun activity if you can get some kids involved to help you get the seeds out of the samara there. So what are some upcoming workshops and classes? I'm actually hosting a foraging foray on March 6th in the evening from 6 to 7:30. And there is no fee to attend that. There is a limit on participation, and you can register for that on our website. Every year in September, there is a festival, the Midwest Wild Harvest Festival, that's held in Prairie du Chien. Right now, they don't have any dates set for that. I think they're still waiting to sort of see what's happening with the pandemic, but that is a really cool festival. And if you're wanting to get into learning more about wild edibles, it'd be a great place to go. There's a lot of people up there who have been doing this their entire lives. And it's a very kind of family friendly festival, and it's overnight. You can camp, and so it's a pretty cool opportunity. So what are some resources? So you've got Rosemary Gladstars Medicinal Herbs, a Beginner's Guide. And this is a great one. It covers some of the things that I talked about today, but it also covers things that you would be growing in your garden maybe anyways, but maybe some different ways that you could use those plants. Or maybe you want to start yourself a medicinal garden. You know, where would you begin? And what could you do with these things? And Rosemary does a great job of keeping things very simple and very clear about how to use these plants. What is a tincture? How do you make a tincture? And so I just really think this is a great one if you're wanting to get started. So Samuel Thayer is a renowned forager, especially here in the Midwest. And he is one of the main speakers or presenters at the Midwest Foraging Festival that I mentioned. So he's got a couple of books. Nature's Garden is one of them, Forager's Harvest. And I really love his books because he speaks from firsthand experience. He has lived this life of living off the land, and since he was a child, really. And I really like his stories that go along with each of the plants. You can tell that he has a personal, intimate relationship with these plants, and he really knows them well. He also has a DVD, so if you are not up for reading and you'd rather watch, you can also check out this DVD. I have it here at Nahant, so if you can't find it and you're interested in just looking at it and checking it out, get a hold of me. I'd be happy to let you borrow it. Backyard foraging. This one covers things that you would just normally find, in your backyard or garden, and gives you just some things, some familiar plants that you weren't aware that they were things that you could eat. And then I mentioned Mike Kriebel earlier. I was first naturalist and has been a great resource for me and many others of creative, fun ways to use wild edibles in everyday foods. So this is a super simple one. It works great with kids too. Super easy recipes. So I would recommend this one as well. And again, if anybody wants to check out any of these books or look at them before purchasing, I'm happy to loan them out. Some social media sites that you can go to. So there's the Midwest Wild Edibles and Forager Society. And don't worry, all these resources are going to be listed in the document I'll send out to you. Another one is Quad Cities Edible Landscape Facebook group. And I like this one because it also expands on not just native wild edibles, but what are some things where you can really edible things that you can incorporate into your landscape that are going to be beautiful and beneficial to you. So you're not just looking at harvesting food from your garden, you're looking at harvesting food from your shrubs, from your trees. So, and kind of thinking about how you want to have your garden expand upward and outward. All right, do we have any questions? Are the red clover leaves edible? I would recommend sticking with the flowers. I don't eat the leaves. And the hosta shoots, is any variety edible? From what I know, yes, but I can't say with 100% certainty. That'd be a good thing to look into. It's a good question. The first social media group name was, let me go back to the screen here. It is the Midwest Wild Edibles and Foragers Society. White clover. Yeah, you can eat the white clover. One thing that I've done with those before, you're sparking a memory for me, is if you gather the white clovers and the red clovers, you can actually make a clover honey with those. That's another fun activity to do as well. There's recipes out there, but essentially you're just harvesting all the flower heads, all the blossoms, and you put them in a pot, you fill it with water and add in a ton of sugar. And you basically boil that down and then strain everything out, strain all the flowers out. And you've got yourself a thick, delicious honey. Thanks, Dan. Any other questions about anything that we discussed here today? Yeah, so the May 6th event, so that will be here at Nahant, and it will be outdoors as long as the weather is good. If the weather looks poor, I may look at rescheduling that. I really would like this particular one to be a field experience. So we'll go over probably some of the things that we discussed in today's presentation, but we'll also expand on that if you're someone who is a beginner and still learning and not quite sure about identification. This would be a great opportunity to help you kind of get a little more confidence in identifying some of these things. And the participation, I believe, is limited to, I want to say around a dozen, and maybe a bit more than that. And there is it's free. You are welcome to donate if you would like to, but it's not necessary. So, and it'll last about an hour and a half. I'm hoping to have some things made up ahead of time that folks can sample as well, as long as they feel comfortable doing so. So it should be a fun night. The May 1st workshop, yes. Let me go back to that real quick here. So this one is done by a guy named Chris Gavin, and I learned about Chris. I learned about Chris on one of the Facebook pages. He's an avid poster on the Midwest Foragers Facebook page, and he's always posting these elaborate, beautiful wild forage dinners and things made with hickory nut oil, and his stuff just looks really good. He's super knowledgeable. And so this is the information. This is not local. I think he might be up in Wisconsin, but I'm not 100% sure where Dane County is. But it's not in Iowa. But this is the information here, and I will share this flyer with anybody who signed up for the workshop too. So the info on my workshop that's one's May 6th from 6 to 7:30. Yes, good luck with your study of biology and culinary arts, Beth and Son. Madison is in Dane County, it looks like. So yeah, Wisconsin then sounds like. The Mace, I will check into that. Is that on the website, Jamie? Thanks, Emily. All right, I'll give it a few more minutes for questions. And if there aren't any in the next 2 minutes that come in, then I'll go ahead and shut it down here. But look forward to that email that's going to come. Again, if there's any questions you have afterwards, feel free to shoot me an email, and make sure that the information is showing up correct on the website. Looks like that needs to be updated. We'll get that. We'll make sure we get that updated. I will send out the link to everyone for that foraging foray, so that you've got a direct link to go to sign up for that one. thank you all for attending today and letting me chat with you about one of my favorite things to chat about, food and plants. So